Hello fellow YouTubers, and welcome to episode 24 and the finale of reading my first self-published novel, Aggravation. Outside now, Clyde began to take a series of images as he slowly made his way toward he wasn't sure what it was until he caught sight of it in the pulse of the first flash. But after that he knew exactly what it was. The same craft Harriet and Henrietta had seen 69 years ago. A bowler hat. There was no mistaking it. It was a craft that looked like a bowler hat with a flat brim. It was such an incredible experience that Clyde was beside himself. To think that here, right before his very eyes, was an extraterrestrial craft hovering no more than 3 meters above the ground, 10 meters in front of him. Yet it wasn't a large craft, perhaps 4 to 5 meters in diameter, 3 meters top to bottom. As he envisaged, it must have been for the sisters to see it with such clarity from their position on the ground, close to 200 meters distant from it. So maybe there were other craft, the same shape but bigger, like a mothership. Who knows? It wasn't important. It didn't matter. It was here. It was real, and it was now responding to the lightning-like pulses of the camera's inbuilt flash. First the white light beneath it dulled, flickered once, twice, then went out. "Can you believe this, Sandy?" Clyde asked of Sandy, standing in the open door of the caravan. "No, I can't, but I'd have to, don't I?" Suddenly a ring of small white lights appeared on the rim, and just as suddenly Clyde had a premonition that something incredible was about to happen. Perhaps he thought, I will make contact with the visitors, either face to face or through some type of telepathy. And that thought overwhelmed him with expectation. But then another thought replaced that in an instant. What if they abduct me and do all sorts of experiments on me, like all those I've read about? Suddenly Clyde wasn't anywhere as enthusiastic as he was a few moments ago, and he began to back away. But what happened next was beyond his wildest imaginations. He had said to Sandy that he thought Tall Hill was the pyramid, or at least the pyramid was buried inside the hill. But now he was about to see that his first assumption was correct. When Clyde felt the ground beneath his feet begin to tremble, he was reminded of the episode in the cemetery and instinctively jumped to one side. But unlike the incident at the cemetery, the ground continued to heave in his new position, and he panicked and sought refuge inside the caravan. There was, however, no reprieve from the vibration inside the caravan. In fact, it only intensified, and with it Clyde and Sandy looked at each other with terror in their eyes. Both were convinced it was an earthquake, but as the ground began to shake and they found it hard to maintain their feet, Clyde noticed through the window running parallel to his bed that the entire hill was illuminated by a massive spotlight, and in that light he could see the hill moving. No, it wasn't the hill moving, he then realized, but rather everything that made up the landscape of the hill. The trees and the earth and all that was scattered about it was peeling away, yet it wasn't doing so as if subjected to the utter chaos of a landslide. It was ordered and totally controlled, as if a switch had been flicked and it was opening up to reveal a secret entrance. The scale of it was enormous and made the small craft that now hovered at a height of perhaps 30 meters above the road look like a toy, yet it possessed incredible power and energy, able to light up the entire hill with the spotlight, while at the same time emit a concentrated beam of intense white light that held the 4 boulders and the rock that was the top of the hill, suspended in the night sky as if they weighed nothing. But as the ground trembled and shook and Sandy and Clyde gripped the window frame as they kneeled on Clyde's bed, desperately trying to maintain their position, The deafening sound as tens of thousands of tons of earth and rock complained to the stresses put upon them. It wasn't, Clyde thought, just a Batman-Batcave-like opening that was going to be revealed, but something else entirely different. With the caravan rising then settling on its springs every few seconds and shaking everything in it that wasn't nailed or screwed down, Sandy was convinced that they should make for the car and a quick getaway while they could. But Clyde wasn't having anything to do with it. "You go if you have a mind to, Sandy, but I want to see this through to the very end, come hell or high water." "God damn it, Clyde, but you can be a stubborn bastard at times." "Yes, but only sometimes." Uncertain if he was physically capable of making it to the car with the ground so treacherous, but mainly because he didn't want to leave his friend alone, Sandy decided to stay put and take his chances. If the worst came to the worst and the ground opened up and swallowed them, well, so be it. They would die. And if it didn't, and they survived, well, wouldn't they have another incredible story to tell? Clyde, however, wasn't thinking along those lines. He was too fascinated with what was happening with the hill. "Jesus Christ, Sandy," he said in a shrill voice of excitement. "How are they able to do that? Just look at the way everything out there is moving so casually aside. It's as if the entire hills is one gigantic model glued together and mounted on tracks. I tell you, Sandy, it's unbelievable, it is." Sandy had to admit that it was indeed an impressive sight, and unbelievable, and couldn't possibly be happening, and that he was dreaming, and when he woke everything would be as it was, and nothing had happened, and he wouldn't have to admit that Clyde had been right all along. God damn it. Clyde was so excited that he had forgotten to photograph what was happening. He'd also forgotten where he put the camera. Casting his mind back, he remembered having the camera in his grasp when he stepped inside the caravan. So he must have continued to hang on to it when the upheaval well and truly began. So where the hell was it? The most incredible event in the history of mankind was unfolding before his very eyes, and he couldn't find his fucking camera to record it. "God damn it, Sandy, have you seen my camera?" "Your what? Your camera? How the hell would I know what you did with it?" Frantic, he began to search for it, throwing himself about on the bed as he pushed an arm between the edge of the bed and the wall, groaning and cursing, eventually finding himself on the floor face to face with it. "Thank Christ," he said, flopping knees first on the bed. "I found it." "Well, good for you," Sandy said testily. "I hope it still works," he muttered under his breath. It did. He smiled and began to capture images. Observing the awe-inspiring scene via the LCD screen, it had all the hallmarks of a disaster movie without the disaster. In fact, with the hill splitting in two like it was, Clyde couldn't help but think that it reminded him of a scene from an old Godzilla movie minus Godzilla breathing flames at some flying creature or lumbering giant reptile. Sandy, on the other hand, was thinking it was the beginning of the end of the world, and that at any moment there would be a massive explosion and it would be lights out, game over. And when, in an instant, the thunderous rumbling stopped and was replaced with a deathly silence, Sandy felt that time was nigh. It was so quiet that both men could hear not only their own breathing but the breathing of each other. So quiet that both men could hear the otherwise inaudible hiss of the gas lantern that, unbeknown to them, had toppled off the bench and was lying on the floor. So quiet, in fact, that for the first time there was a hint of sound coming from the object hovering above the road. "It's humming," Clyde said. "Can you hear it?" "Course I can hear it. Could hear a pin drop, it's so bloody quiet." Then, out of nowhere, in the blink of an eye, the object of Clyde's obsession was right there where before there had been nothing but dark. Not small as Clyde had expected it might be, but a massive monolith that appeared white in the spotlight, seemingly as smooth as silk that gave the illusion that it was liquid and flowing. Harriet and Henrietta had said it felt like water on the inside, but not water as we know it. Now Clyde knew that that description was a valid one. He wanted to touch it. Felt an almost overwhelming urge to do that, except for one thing. Would he be allowed to do that? "I'm going outside," Clyde said. Incredulous, Sandy said, "You what? You go—" And just like that he was gone. "Jesus H. Christ," Sandy hissed. "Bloody bugger of a man." But in one way Sandy was grateful that Clyde had gone, because when he turned round to follow his rapid departure, he saw the gas lantern that Ned had heard topple off the bench, lying on its side on the floor close to a cupboard door. The glass broken, but the mantle still burning, the heat from which had blackened the veneer, and it was smoking, close to catching fire, Sandy reckoned, as he turned the lantern off and righted it. A minute longer and the caravan could have been well and truly alight. Kneeling on the bed again a few seconds later, he spotted Clyde straight away, and from then on Sandy never took his eyes off him. He would have if he'd known how to operate the camera Clyde had left on the bed, but he didn't, and he wasn't prepared to run the risk of accidentally deleting the score of images Clyde had taken in a futile effort to use it. Standing at the edge of the road, still only clad in his pyjamas, yet totally unaware that he was so absorbed, so overwhelmed, that even the cold night air on the ground under his bare feet no longer existed. Clyde's attention was divided between looking at the pyramid and up at the hovering craft, waiting for an invitation to continue on or a warning to keep his distance. If a warning came, he hoped it would be a subtle one and not a bolt from the blue, so to speak, a nudge with an elbow rather than a whack with a sledgehammer. For 30 seconds or so he waited, and when neither happened, he guarded all his nerve and walked to the middle of the road, stopped momentarily, then walked to the opposite edge where, in mid-stride, a beam of light shone down and focused on the ground a metre in front of him. It was the invitation he'd been waiting for. Although the hill was ablaze with light, the ground below was dappled and full of shadows, so it was patently obvious to Clyde that the visitors were benevolent and meant him and Sandy no harm. Yet strange as it was, considering the extraordinary circumstances, Clyde found his mind racing with questions he had no answers to, beginning with, "Why am I being privileged so?" He was over the moon about it, but why him and nobody else? Was it because they knew of his association with the sisters? Or did they know of his obsession with the pyramid? Will I remember this once it's over? Or will my mind be wiped clean? Will the images remain in the camera? Or will the memory card be deleted? That above all else would be a disaster. He had no plan to go public. It was the furthest thing from his mind. But to lose those images would have him always wondering if this perhaps had been a figment of his imagination all along. Nevertheless, he had no control over that, none whatsoever, for they were in control and dealing out the cards. So all he could do was relish the experience of 1,000 lifetimes and accept whichever way the cards may fall. To Sandy, Clyde seemed to be gliding forward. Maybe it was a trick of the light and the distance involved, but he would swear on his mother's grave that that's what Clyde was doing. For be damned if he could see him moving up and down, as would be dictated by the terrain. Clyde too had the same feeling, even though he was sure his feet were touching the ground, although he had to admit his breathing wasn't laboured at all. In fact, his breathing was shallow, his heart rate steady, and his body wasn't feeling the slightest hint of being under duress. But when the moment came and he was standing close to the pyramid, all that changed in an instant. His heart went from his chest to his throat. His breathing became laboured, and as he extended his right arm, his hand trembled. Yet he wasn't afraid, quite the opposite, but rather overpowered with the wonder of being so close to something from another world that was as intangible as it was real. And as he looked up in awe at the peak of the pyramid, he noticed the light that illuminated didn't extend past it. And he remembered what the sisters had said. What power do they possess to control light in such a way? With his fingertips only a few centimetres from the surface of the pyramid, he could already feel a slight vibration, like a hand on a sink with the water running. Then when he took the bold step and passed his hands through the strange surface, it was indeed like water on the inside, but not as we know it. It was the strangest feeling, yet it was like one that anyone could experience if they wore a surgical glove and gripped and placed their hand in cold water. You could feel the surface tension, but your hand remained dry. Clyde could feel the liquid on his fingertips, but when he rubbed the tips together he couldn't feel the liquid between them. Mercury, he thought. That's what it feels like. He remembered as a child a thermometer breaking, and how he had looked on with fascination as the tiny beads of mercury rolled around on the ground as if they had a life and mind of their own. And when he managed to coax a bead onto the palm of his hand, he remembered how strange it felt. Stranger still when he touched it, and even stranger when it felt like liquid, but wasn't wet. Could this liquid be mercury, or something like it, he asked himself. It was another question that he would never have an answer to. Whatever this liquid was and what it represented was of an unknown origin as the craft that hovered above him and the visitors inside of it. And they weren't giving anything away. When Clive withdrew his hand, something came out with it on the palm of his hand. A small black pyramid that Clyde folded his fingers over and gripped tightly. And with the closing of his hand, that's all Clyde remembered until he found himself sitting before the fire next to Sandy. What happened? Clyde asked. Then he glanced at Tor Hill. It was as it was and had always been. I don't know, Sandy said. I remember seeing you near the pyramid, when the next thing I know I'm lighting a fire. When did I come into the picture? You were sitting where you are now when I returned from the caravan with 2 mugs of tea. But how did you know I'd be here? I just knew. And for some strange reason that doesn't seem strange to me. Does that make sense? Yes. Yes, it does, as a matter of fact. Noticing Clyde's right hand white-knuckled, Sandy asked, What have you got in your right hand? A gift, Clyde said, opening his hand. A tiny but priceless memento of an extraordinary event. It was, wasn't it? And to think of all the people that was here to witness it with you was me. Me? For Christ's sake. Can you believe it? It is hard to believe it, but I'm glad it was you, because I can't think of another living soul I would have wanted to share it with. Not to mention that you can't deny the existence of UFOs anymore. No, I can't do that anymore. But you know, Clyde, less than a year ago, the most excitement I got was when I reeled in a native fish now and again. Then you come along and change all that. I've been given a fortune, desecrated a grave, had 3 near-death experiences, battled a demon, spoken to ghosts, and now I've had a real close encounter and seen a hill split in 2 to reveal a massive pyramid. It was destined to be, Sandy. Yesterday I would have said that there's no such thing as destiny or fate or coincidence, and would have debated the issue until the cows came home. But not now. Now I think just about everything and anything is possible. No, on second thoughts, I think everything and anything is possible after seeing you flying. Well, gliding anyway. Was I? I felt as light as a feather, but was positive my feet were touching the ground. It didn't look like that to me. Well, I suppose everything and anything is possible for them. There was a brief pause in the conversation as Sandy rolled a smoke and Clyde sipped his tea. When Sandy asked, So where does that leave us as far as the survey is concerned? Done and dusted, Sandy, Clyde replied emphatically. I know the pyramid's there, and that's all I ever wanted to know. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad too, because if I hadn't had confirmation, I don't know what I would have done. You would have killed yourself looking for it. That's what you would have done, Sandy said matter-of-factly. Yes, I probably would have. So, what are you going to do with all the pictures? I mean, are you going to write a book and go public? No, no way. Man would never get a moment's peace if he did something like that. Have every crook and nutcase on the face of the planet contacting you. And the worldwide media would aver you one day and the next they ridicule you for perpetrating an elaborate hoax. I'm glad to hear that too. And speaking of books, I'm a bit worried about writing ours, because if we did, wouldn't it be confession to committing a crime? Would be if we were silly enough to say it was a true story. But it is. Yeah, but as far as the reading public is concerned, it's pure fiction. In fact, all of my books are based on true events but fictionalised, because people will sue at the drop of a hat if they feel they've been wronged. After relighting his cigarette, Sandy said, I'm still finding it hard to believe what happened. I know it did, but I feel the same way. But you know, except for the shock, horror of the earth trembling, I was surprisingly at ease with what followed. I was reasonably okay then myself, but when I first encountered that thing on the road, I was pissing myself. And when it followed me, I was scared shitless. Yet I couldn't get away from it. I tried, but the moment I took off, it pulled me back. And when that happened, I was petrified. I don't blame you. I think I would have been too. And I'll tell you something else. When I drew my arm back to throw the rock, I swear blind the back of my hand brushed the surface of that thing. What did it feel like? Don't know. Like I said, I just brushed it. Clyde proceeded to tell Sandy what the pyramid felt like to touch, going on to say what he was feeling standing so close to something that wasn't of this world, after which both men sat in silence for a short period before calling it a night. Sandy woke at 5 as usual and got up. He had barely 4 hours sleep, but it was all he needed. Both agreed before taking to their respective bed that they might as well pack up and return home. With the yabby trap in the dam, Sandy retrieved it before doing anything else. It was empty. When he returned to camp, he decided to fill in the pit toilet. If Clyde wanted to go when he got up, he would have to kangaroo it or wait until he got home. But just as he was about to take the first shovel of dirt, he noticed paw prints pressed into it. They had had a visitor during the night. However, these paw prints weren't those of a native animal, but from what must have been a big cat, a very big cat. And they were a good set of prints. 4 paws, Sandy thought. So the cat must have planted its front paws on the mound to have a look around, perhaps taking in the scent of the toilet. He decided to leave the prints undisturbed so Clyde could take a photograph. The drum toilet, however, he packed away with the yabby trap, the shower and blind, the generator and the 2 buckets and kerosene tin boiler as well. By the time Clyde was up and about, the only things that needed to be done was retract the annex, place the fold-up table and 2 chairs in the caravan, and couple the caravan to the car. Clyde filled the toilet pit after he captured 3 images of the paw prints before having breakfast. He, like Sandy, wasn't the least bit surprised on seeing the prints, for both knew it was more than plausible that a big cat or cats existed. 40 minutes later, Sandy dropped Clyde off at home, helped to unload his gear and carry inside, but didn't stay, saying he'd pop over sometime later to browse the prints Clyde said would be ready and waiting. He was as keen as Sandy to see them. Clyde instructed Sandy to keep everything in the refrigerator freezer before he saw him off. Rummaging through Someone else's fridge freezer had always left a sour taste in his mouth. Since seeing an uncle reclaim the food he had bought before he departed the house, he had been a guest in for a week. It didn't dawn on the mongrel that he'd been put up free of charge. By the time Clyde did a load of washing, hung it on the line along with 2 blankets to air, put away the clothes that hadn't been used, it was time for a much-earned mug of tea and something to nibble on. At the computer he downloaded the images, 48 in all, and was ecstatic with the results. They were all virtually monochrome with just a hint of colour in a few, a rainbow effect caused by the refraction of light, when those few were nothing if not spectacular. But the most startling images of all were the first 8 taken of the craft as it hovered above the road close to camp. Clyde just couldn't get over how finely defined it was. Yet if an outsider saw them, they would be under no illusion that it was a bowler hat that had been photographed, and the image was therefore a fake. And there was no denying that the veracity of such a statement, because for all intents and purposes, that's exactly what it was. It didn't matter to Clyde because he knew different. And when any of those 8 were compared with the craft spotlighting the hill as it split in two, then anyone who could still claim a hoax would have been another imbecile. However, when Sandy called on Clyde later that afternoon, he too was prompted to say how much the craft resembled a bowler hat. And if he didn't know better, would swear it was nothing but a hoax. A damn good hoax, but a hoax nonetheless. And when he saw the other images, good as they were, he said that it was just as well Clyde wasn't going public with them, because no one would believe it was anything but a hoax. As for the tiny pyramid, well, it could be a piece from a board game to those who didn't know any different. Nevertheless, Clyde and Sandy marvelled at the enlarged prints, firm in the knowledge that what they were looking at was real. But no one, Clyde insisted, but Elmer and maybe Louise would ever be privileged to them and the original images. How come you mention Louise? Sandy asked. Because I like and trust her. Good enough reason. I like and trust her too. But with the mention of Louise, Clyde didn't think it was an opportune time to discuss his feelings for her. In fact, he doubted if there would ever be such a time. Sandy's opinion meant a lot to him, but there was every chance that he wouldn't agree, and Clyde would never hear the end of it. No, it wasn't worth risking their friendship on what could be nothing more than the mind of a silly old man infatuated with a beautiful young woman. There was, however, one very important subject that had to be discussed, and that was what they were going to say to Senior Sergeant Eric Rafferty when he came calling, and he would, to inquire about the strange lights and rumblings that must have been reported by God knows how many of the town's population, but they must have experienced firsthand. That's a good question, Clyde, Sandy said. What do we say, considering there's no denying we were there and Eric knows it? Yes, that's the problem, isn't it? If his visit had been in the morning, we could have said we had packed up and were long gone by then. But it was evening, he could see we were there for the night. But Clyde was quick to think, but hang on a minute. Why didn't he show up at the scene when you consider he did that after he received a call about fire on the top of the hill? I mean, surely his phone must have been running hot. So why didn't he get out here? And there's another thing. How come Mouth Almighty across the road hasn't said anything about it? The blabbermouth wouldn't be able to resist going on about something like that. I don't know, Sandy said. Do you think that maybe no one else saw and heard anything? I suppose it's possible. I find it hard to believe, but I suppose it's possible. But what if Eric did receive calls but for some reason just couldn't go out there? Well, I think we have but 2 options if he asks questions. We lie through our teeth or we tell half-truths. I'm not going to lie, Sandy said seriously. Then we tell him that we felt an earth tremor and saw strange lights in the sky and nothing else. I'll go along with that. Then that's what we tell him. Eric did call on Sandy and Clyde, and that's what they told him. Nothing more, nothing less, and he was satisfied with that account. Charlie Jessup, however, had missed out on the strange events that Thursday night. He was home, but he had donned his spared no expense headphones and totally lost all connection to the outside world watching Avatar. Clyde would know all about the movie, of course, eventually. The Clarion ran a front-page account of the events, which included statements from many of the town's residents, including Senior Sergeant Eric Rafferty. There was no mention of Clyde and Sandy. For Clyde and Sandy, life resumed at a more leisurely pace. They fished often. Clyde learned how to handle a firearm, attained a shooter's license and bought a .22 single-shot rifle. And with a permit to hunt in Welcome State Forest, he and Sandy made regular visits to bag the odd rabbit or two. Alma returned from her overseas holiday the weekend before Clyde had his MRI scan, the result of which got the all clear. The fugue stakes disappeared as mysteriously as they had commenced, leaving Clyde in no doubt that they were stress-related. Clyde arranged to have the old garage demolished and a double to replace it 2 weeks after Christmas. Sandy, as Clyde expected, did not surprise himself with his writing, finding that once he started the words flowed. He was well aware that what he wrote was amateurish when compared to Clyde, but he hadn't had any allusion to the contrary when he began. Clyde congratulated him on the title Grey Fears, saying it was an excellent title and the one they would use. Grey Fears remains a work in progress. Clyde did include a picture of Louisa's bust in his latest novel, We All Have a Story to Tell, with his website address underneath. He had hesitated sending off the manuscript for 5 weeks, in 2 minds if he should include a photograph of the bust, finally deciding a week before Christmas to do it regardless. If Louise should return, maybe she would want to commence where she had left off, and if she didn't, no harm would be done. On Saturday, February 5th, 2011, Clyde returned to the cemetery to tidy up Harriet and Henrietta's graves. He had made a promise that he would do that every other week, and had kept that promise. However, Clyde had another reason to visit the cemetery on that day, and that was to place the tablet-like headstone on the grave of the little one that lay forgotten. On the day, he had paid a visit to Braithwaite and Son to inquire of Victoria MacArthur's final resting place. He had also inquired if they knew who was buried at that site, and, following a search of their early records, Mr. Braithwaite Senior had found who it was, age, and the date of interment. Elizabeth Rose Turner, age 3, 18/8/1898. And with that information, Clyde had ordered a headstone. It had been a rather solemn occasion, as much as a joyous one for Clyde, for it was all too easy for him to think how sad it was for someone so young to lose their life when their life had but begun. There was nothing unusual about children dying. It was a fact of life. But the thought of this little girl lying under the ground for so long, lost to the world, tore at his heartstrings. But once he had placed the headstone and stood before the grave looking down upon it, he could almost feel her presence, so close that her spirit could be standing next to him and, perhaps, smiling as she looked at her name that nobody had seen and didn't know if she existed or not for half a century or more. And maybe she was. And maybe she wasn't alone. Maybe there were spirits aplenty in this and every cemetery doing the exact same thing because they could and it pleased them to do so. He would never know. But then, there is, however, one thing that continues to haunt Clyde. Nothing serious, a mere bagatelle really, but something that pops into his mind now and then. Harriet and Henrietta had made a vow to each other that once their mother died, they would never discard anything. So where are the family photographs? They had been repelled by them because of the horrid images they invoked, their self-imposed guilt, but they wouldn't have been able to bring themselves to destroy them. So where are they? He has as yet been unable to find them. He is convinced they are in the house somewhere and will continue to look for them. But if the ground-penetrating radar can't locate them, what chance is there that he ever will? And thus rid his life of yet another aggravation. Well, that's it. Whew. I hope you enjoyed the readings. I hope you enjoyed the story. Please let me know what you think. And I'd like to say a special thank you to my dear friend Colleen, who has been a big supporter and has told me in all of her comments, and she comments reliably after every episode, that she had enjoyed the readings, and she had thanked me very much for doing so. It was my pleasure, Colleen, even though there were times I was on the verge of giving it away. It's great that someone has really appreciated my time and effort I put into this. Will I read another of my novels? Not for a while, if I do. The readings never got a lot of views, but so be it. And it does take a lot out of me to read, and if I do read another one of my novels, it would be from a manuscript, and the words are a little bit smaller. I had to get myself another pair of reading glasses, I think. But anyhow, we'll see what happens. Maybe sometime in the future, I don't know. Well, I want to thank you for watching and listening, or just closing your eyes and listening to the words. And until next time, bye for now. Whew. Couldn't resist.